I spoke to one of my colleagues today who was on the train, headed to New York for a Broadway play. I spoke to someone else who I watched book his tickets while we were on the floor, who was headed to the airport for a flight out, but I am here with you. Yes, so this is my first session in the Senate. And I want to start off with my committee assignment. I have been assigned to the Judicial Proceedings Committee. If you have a copy of this letter, it'll help you follow along with what I'm sharing today. The Judicial Proceedings Committee covers all of our criminal law, civil law, public safety, police reform, judicial appointments, and family law. I know that judicial appointments are very important to a lot of folks in this room. I will just say on that topic, we have not made any changes to the way that our judges are selected and then confirmed and then running in contested judicial elections. But that issue will be back up next year. And I'll give you a preview that my chairman, Senator Will Smith, a senator out of Montgomery County, he is in favor of revising that contested judicial election process that we have. So if that's something that you're interested in, then you'll want to stay tuned for future sessions. I am going to start this talk and end this talk talking about the budget because it is what predominated our session this year. In this session, we were faced with an unprecedented revenue shortage. We came into session understanding that we were underwater about $3 billion in a structural deficit. And what was unfortunate was seeing people point fingers and try to place blame on whose fault it was that we had this $3 billion deficit. I do know who was unwilling to take any responsibility, and that was our previous governor. They made a very concerted effort to try to lay this at the feet of Governor Moore and to try to make it sound like for some reason he came into office and he wasn't able to manage the state's finances, but that simply is not true. We have had a brewing structural deficit for many years, and we have understood it, and we've tried to do things to enhance our revenue code to make sure it keeps up with modern times, but we simply needed to put the gas forward in terms of what we do because we were still way too far behind. We had disparities like if you walk into a store and you buy something, there's a 6% sales tax. But if you purchase that same product and you download it digitally online, then you weren't paying any sales tax. I thought to myself, when is the last time my son went into GameStop and purchased a cartridge game? It had been years and years. But when's the last time he went into his console and did an in-app purchase and did a download? That happens quite regularly. So we needed to modernize our tax code to keep up with things. So you'll see that happening. I understand that the topic of taxes is people's least favorite topic, mine included, because I pay them too. But we had some things that we had to do this session. One of the things that we did was we put an IT tax in place. You'll hear that marketed as the tech tax. What it means is that certain products that are software only, that used to be, they call it service as software, where you used to purchase something in person or a job someone used to do. You can imagine that if your payroll is done by a person, there are payroll taxes associated with that person doing the job. But if you now have a software that does all of that for you, then where is the revenue that's lost by that employee in those payroll taxes? So that was an effort to modernize the tax code. We did some small things as it relates to the sales tax on vending machines, and then we did some small things with taxes on some of those services that no one likes to talk about, cannabis and gambling. We did some things there, and I'll touch on those a little bit later. This was a very successful session for Team Henson. We passed 8 bills. Yes. Thank you, Burl, for leading the clap, my Chief of Staff, Burl Downs. We had a fantastic legislative director, Dr. Linda Bonner, who joined us in our office this session. We met Linda through her work with ACT, and she is an incredibly dynamic individual, and she ran the legislation for us, and she has 8 of those bills sitting on the governor's desk right now. Yes. It's remarkable when you think about it because the process is really designed for you to not pass legislation, not for you to pass legislation. That's why it goes through 2 chambers. We have a bicameral legislature. That's why you only have 90 days to get the job done. That's why you have the process of being able to add amendments on the floor. The process is really designed to defeat your bill, not for your bill to pass. So for Dr. Bonner to be able to get 8 of my bills to the governor is phenomenal. You have them all listed on the back page of the first page of what's in front of you, and I'm going to highlight just 2 of them for you. The first one I'm going to highlight is the Maryland Tenant Mold Protection Act. We have worked, yes. We have worked for 5 years on this issue with mold. You have seen it in our hacker families here in Annapolis, but I will tell you that this issue is not isolated to Annapolis, and it is not isolated to HACA. We've had folks contact us from the Eastern Shore, from Montgomery County, from Western Maryland. When you are a legislator and you do something and you become known for it, people who have that challenge will contact you from all over. So Borough gets calls from folks who have mold in their rental housing all over this state, and it let me know that it really was a broader issue. So what we've done is we put some tenant protections in place, and then we also have our state departments coming up with some standards by regulation as well. So this is a part of what we're doing on mold, and we have even more left to go. The second one that I will highlight is the Transit Worker Safety Act. That is a bill where I had MTA drivers come to my office and they shared with me incidences of being assaulted while being drivers for our MTA systems. A young lady came in and shared about a man who had assaulted her multiple times, and then they still wouldn't exclude him from riding on MTA, and then her coworker was driving, and that individual came and ripped the side window open to the bus and assaulted her through the bus window. And they talked about how terrifying that is when it is your job. And then the trauma of going back to work and not knowing if you'll encounter that same individual and feeling like they didn't have support and protection from their leadership. So we passed the Transit Worker Safety Act, and I'm really, really proud of that piece of legislation. That was good. So you have a few other things you'll see there. You'll see familiar names like the New Village Academy. In order to get that at the Annapolis Mall, it required an exemption to our alcohol laws because you can't have a school within 1,000 feet of a licensed alcohol facility. So you have restaurants that are there at the Annapolis Mall. So at the 11th hour, they were going to pull the lease for the New Village Academy and not allow them to come to the Annapolis Mall because they didn't want to have to sacrifice all the restaurants and other businesses with the liquor license. So we were able to get an exception to that license so we can still have that school at the Annapolis Mall. I'm very proud of that. And then the third page tells you some things I'll be working on for next year, because while we were very successful, we did have bills that still need work and they didn't get through this session. We were working with some students from the University of Maryland about doxing, and I learned so much about what our young people face when you are a person who will raise your voice and who will stand up and who will speak out about injustice. They faced having their personal information spread across the World Wide Web so that people could target it and attack them for being people who are willing to stick fast to their beliefs. So we're going to continue to work with them. We had a lot of great work that we started with childcare, work about our pre-K expansion and making sure that our pre-K providers have the support they need, and we'll come back and pick that work up again. And then we have some landlord-tenant work, because what is a session for me if I'm not working for landlord and tenant bills? So we will work on some of those bills again. So if you get to the other pages, it's more or less written like an appendix where I go kind of topic by topic. These are not bills I've sponsored. The first 8 are bills that I sponsored and we led on in my office. These are bills that I supported, is what you'll see here in the appendix, and they're broken down by subject. I will start with child care and education and highlight just one of them, the Excellence in Maryland Public Schools Act. So one of the things that we knew we needed to do was take a second look at the blueprint for Maryland's future. When we put the blueprint together, we had a really solid plan for what do the next 20 years of public education in Maryland look like. But anybody who's ever made a plan knows that you can't just make a plan and put it on the shelf. You have to reevaluate your plan. You have to look at where you are now. You have to make tweaks and corrections to your plan to be able to meet your challenges as they change over time. So that's what we've done with this bill. The governor came in with some ideas, and the House and the Senate had some additional ideas, but we landed on something I think we're all really proud of. One of the things that we had to protect was that additional grant funding for concentration of poverty schools. We give some additional funding to those schools that have high amounts of kids who are on free and reduced price meals. Well, the administration had some ideas about slowing down the pace of those grants. And what we did was we were able to make sure we protected that funding, so we're still bringing that home for our students, and that was great. If you look at the data, it really shows that that concentration of poverty money is really making an impact. We've seen some dramatic increases in test scores and increases in student attendance and kindergarten readiness at some of our schools in our district. I know my alma mater is Tyler Heights Elementary School, and they've been really successful with some of that concentration of poverty money. So we want to make sure we protect that for the future. I'll go on to criminal justice and criminal law and criminal justice reform. This was a big area that we spent a lot of time on in my committee, judicial proceedings. One of the priority bills for the Legislative Black Caucus was the bill called the Second Look Act. So what we figured out in Maryland is that everyone in this room knows, Maryland has the ugly stain of incarcerating more Black people per capita than any other state in the nation. What we figured out is that there's kind of two driving factors. We incarcerate you young in Maryland. We get you in the system as a child and we incarcerate you. We charge you as an adult. And then once we have you in the system, we don't let you go. If you look at a specific period of time as well, there was a time in the late 80s, early 90s where the war on drugs was really driving a lot of excessive sentences. We have people who were sent to jail for multiple years, life sentences even, who never did anything violent, but we sent people to prison for a very, very long time. So if you're one of those people and you find yourself in prison for a very long time, how do you get an opportunity to reestablish your life and get out? Well, that's what the Second Look Act would do. It would take people who were incarcerated when they committed a crime between ages 18 and 24, so it's a very small window, and then they had to have been charged for that crime before, I believe it's 1994. So we're targeting a population there where we know, where we've gone back and we've looked at the data and we know that we were sentencing people who were Black to much longer sentences than other people. So folks that fit in that category would get an opportunity for a second look, which means instead of going before the parole commission, they could go back to a judge who could look at their sentence and determine if they had rehabilitated themselves, done enough things to be able to reduce their sentence. So it's an additional opportunity for those folks who have rehabilitated themselves to be able to come home. So you'll see that we passed that. This was a multi-year effort, and the Legislative Black Caucus, I think everyone in this room should be so proud of the work that they did this session. The caucus really stuck together. The caucus was very strong and definite about their priorities, and I think it probably was one of the most successful sessions for the Legislative Black Caucus. In the Senate, there are 16 Black senators, 3 of us are women, so it's a very tight bond in terms of determining what's best for Black Marylanders. You do have a very insular group that's able to get together, and when we work well and support each other, we're able to do big things like the Second Look Act. There was a lot of opposition about that. I am pretty sure when I run for office again, you are going to get a mailer that says Shanika Henson is letting out thugs, criminals, and everybody else. Because that's what happens when you take steps to support something like that. And Delegate Beller, he's in the room as well, Dylan, he voted for that bill too, to support bringing people home and giving them second chances. So his face will probably be on the mailer next to mine. Yes, saying the same thing. And then another one we did was geriatric and medical parole. We don't have a formalized process for people who are in prison and who are very elderly, folks who are sometimes near death and who want to spend their final days, weeks with their loved ones so that they can die with dignity. We don't have a formalized process for that. So the geriatric and medical parole we have passed that law. So this is now becoming the law, and our Department of Corrections will establish that formalized process where you can go before the parole commission simply because you are at an end stage in life, and to give people that opportunity to come home. So we're very proud about that, another Black Caucus priority. I'm going to move on to the section on equity. You have 2 things that are highlighted there. The first one, you probably wonder, why did you highlight that one of all the hundreds of bills? We passed mandatory training for our boards of education members to take anti-bias training. If you would like to know why that's so important to me, you can see me specifically. And I'll tell you why that's important to me. But thank you, Dr. Wainwright. It's very important. And you would be surprised, even in a place like Anne Arundel County, where it is so important to make sure that the folks who have their hands on the pulse of our children's education, that they understand what implicit bias means and what it is. It is something that lives in all of us. And when you get to the place in life where you feel like it's not you, that's when you need training. So we're going to work on that. We also have the State Reparations Commission we passed into law. This was hard, and I'll give you a little behind the scenes. It was also very hard for our governor. There is so much pressure on Wes Moore. If you see the attacks that exist about him, people attack every aspect of his life, even things you think would be unassailable, like his intellect. He is a Rhodes Scholar. How dare anyone presume that this man is not showed up prepared and competent for the job? But every part of him is scrutinized and attacked. And so the Black Caucus and the governor had some differing opinions on which way to go. Do you do more of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission where you talk about what's happened in the past, you bring people to the table for that kind of cathartic experience of better understanding and acknowledging our history? Or do you do that and then take it one step further and talk about, now, what are we going to do about it? And the Black Caucus was on the side of, now, what are we going to do about it? So that's what this commission will do. We've established the commission to sit down and to study the history of slavery in Maryland and to talk about what steps we would need to take as a state to repair what we know is a very ugly history. So that is a huge priority for the state of Maryland. We're one of only a handful of states, but I know that for the Black Caucus, we felt like if we have the largest Black caucus in the country, because we do, and we can't pass this here in Maryland, then we should all just pack up and go home. So that was huge, huge. We did several things that helped our federal workers under the economic development section. You'll see just one of them. Yes. Thank you. Our federal workers have been under attack. We have people who have shared with us their experience of getting that letter from the federal government, a job that is not just your job, but it's your career. It is your livelihood. It is how you feed your family every day. And getting a letter in the mail to say that your position is going to be eliminated. And this is what you have poured yourself into. And you're trying to figure out what's next. Not only to be eliminated, but to be discarded in a way where the government is hostile to your existence. I wrote one of my newsletters about my mom's experience as a federal employee. And I talked about how her working for the USDA gave us stability as a family. My dad was able to be a full-time pastor and an entrepreneur and to do those things that God gave him gifts for doing, partly because my mother had the stability of her federal job. Me and my sisters were able to go to college. We were able to accomplish our goals and dreams in life because we had that stability in our family. And when I fired that email off and sent it out to about 3,000 people who get my newsletter, I got several responses back from people who were hostile to our federal employees, who said very nasty things about my mother being a career federal employee, and who have now been baited and goaded into somehow thinking that the folks who keep their water clean, who keep their food safe, who make sure airplanes don't fall out of the sky, who set education standards for their students, who make sure that our country is safe, that somehow those people are now being casted as the enemy of the people is insane and crazy. And I cannot attribute it to anything other than delusion. But we are protecting them here in Maryland. The one bill that I highlighted for you, we have taken our state's catastrophic event account and we've authorized a new purpose to be able to give grants and loans, bridge loans and grants to federal workers who have found themselves suddenly losing their jobs and displaced, so that they do have something that they can rely on from their state government where they've paid taxes and spent their time to be able to help them get from that opportunity to the next opportunity. So that's just one of the many things, but it's highlighted there for you. The next section, I talk about family law. One of the issues that I worked on for many years is the issue of child support. I think that we have understood and our knowledge has grown in this state that families can look different. You can have families of all different compositions, but one of the last things we fail to understand is that a family is still a family, even if one parent lives in one household and one parent lives in another. They are still a family. And our child support system doesn't really operate like family. It operates like parent versus parent, and you are in this competition and in this matchup. So one of the things that we were able to do was reduce suspending driver's licenses for folks who are under a certain income level. When people came in to testify, and I'll tell you it was mostly gentlemen who came in to testify, They talked about the fear of not having their driver's license. They talked about how that crippled them from being able to participate in their children's lives. So you couldn't pay your child support, but now what this really means is you can't go to their school events. You can't pick them up. You can't spend your time on the weekend with them. You can't be an active and engaged parent if you don't have the simple ability to get in a car and to go do something with your child. So we are making revisions there. I worked on that bill for 3 years, and then I passed it on to a delegate, Karen Tolles, out of Prince George's County, and she brought that home. And I told her, now all the dads will be contacting your office, Karen, and they're letting you know how thankful they are for that. So we have some changes there. I'll move on to the section of child care and education. Oh, sorry, I went there already. My bad. I'll move on to the section of health care. One of the bills that we got the nastiest emails about was HB 1315. And so I had to go and look at that bill and figure out what sort of demon is inside of HB 1315 that people are this mad. Turns out it was a bill about vaccinations. We understand that the CDC and our federal agencies have become unreliable partners. So what the bill does is it protects certain vaccines that our pharmacists can give to people. Because right now we have it tied to whatever the federal government approves and authorizes. It's what our pharmacists can give to people for vaccines. What we're realizing, in order to protect Marylanders, we're going to have to disaggregate some of those things and no longer trust the federal government to make these decisions for us with this administration in charge. But the amount of anti-vax that will clog your inbox is unreal. But nevertheless, I supported that bill. We passed that bill, so we will be protecting people's immunizations in Maryland. I'm going to go on to housing and real property. This is the area that excites me the most, and we were able to do some good things in housing. One of the real disappointments in housing, our governor had a bill, the Housing for Jobs Act, that Governor Moore introduced. The bill wasn't able to get over the threshold of going through both chambers. I believe the House did pass it, Delegate Beller. The House did pass it. We didn't do our part in the Senate, so it didn't become law, but our governor has done so much great work to try to make sure that housing is affordable and attainable in the state of Maryland. Some of the things that we did deal with landlord and tenant rights. One of the big things that came to us was the Tenant Recovery Possessions Act. There was a case out of Baltimore City where folks were evicted. When the landlord evicted them, the sheriffs came, they changed the locks, and so the people couldn't get access to their property anymore. Well, moments after that, they showed up with a U-Haul truck, and they said, oh my gosh, we have medication in the house, we have our children's things in the house. Will you open the door and let us back in so we can get our things so that we can be okay? We were losing our home, we certainly don't want to lose our things. Well, the law didn't provide for that. It didn't give you that second opportunity to reclaim your property. Once that lock was changed, that was the end of the story, and that was all she wrote. But the Maryland Supreme Court said that that was unlawful, that we have a really good system about what happens to your real property rights, your rights to possess that home. But when it comes to your personal property rights, your rights to the things that you own that are inside that make that house a home, we don't have any due process for that. We don't have a way for you to reclaim your property. So that's what that bill establishes. It came in with a very, very strong way to do that, and to be totally candid, to the compromises that we had to make to get this bill through. It is a much weaker version than we started off with, but at its core, it will give tenants more notice and more opportunity to be heard before they are disconnected from their personal property that's in rental housing. And notice and opportunity to be heard is the essence of due process. So I do think we're getting closer. One of the major things we had to tackle as well was utilities. I know that everybody's BGE bill has gone up, mine has gone up, everybody's has gone up across the state. So we had to figure out, how do we tackle this issue with our utilities? And it's kind of two things that are driving it. We don't produce enough energy in Maryland, and the cost of transmission has gotten really high. There are some artificial reasons why the cost of transmission is high. We have ways where our energy providers, they can raise your bill, raise your rates if they make certain improvements to the energy infrastructure. Well, we found out that they were making certain improvements to the infrastructure simply to be able to raise your rates so that they could charge you more money. So that loophole that we left open for them, they walked right through it. So we have done some things to make sure we implement that with more fidelity, to make sure that if they are making these improvements, they are necessary improvements, so they can't just do things and pass costs and raise your rates. Also, one of the things that they do is they have these multi-year agreements where they negotiate what the rates are going to be, and then they lock those rates in at a certain amount. Well, they were abusing that process because there were limited opportunities for them to come back and say, no, I want a little more. No, I want a little more. So if you negotiate, you kind of start at a place and you end up at a place where everybody's not happy, but you can live with it. But where you can live with is usually your bottom line. When I talk to my clients in my law office, what's your best and final offer? What's the minimum amount? What's the most you can pay? What's that, threshold? So the utility companies will push us right to that threshold where it was the most we could ask, the most we could ask of Maryland ratepayers. And then they would come back and say, I know we said that was it, but actually I want a little more. So what we are doing is stopping their ability to be able to do that. Once you say this is it, this is going to be it. So we're doing that. We're also doing some things to promote producing more energy in Maryland. We're looking at nuclear energy. We're looking at solar energy, how we store that energy so that we can have alternate ways to do that. So I said I would start and end with the budget. There is some good news in the budget. If you turn to the very last page that you have, you see a lot of money. Thank you, Larry. I appreciate you. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Kindness. I appreciate it. I'm telling you, I was up all night and now I'm here. You see a lot of things that are coming back to our city. We have $8.8 million going into City Dock downtown for that revitalization. That's a project that we've dedicated millions of dollars to every session, and we are committed to being partners to see City Dock through, so you see that there. We have some things like Annapolis Middle School. Getting lights on the field at Annapolis Middle School has been unusually hard. I have my theories on why, when you look at who goes to Annapolis Middle School and who will enjoy those lights, on why it was so hard and not as hard in other places. But nevertheless, we have that money. We have the Annapolis Juneteenth Museum and Cafe with some Bonneville money. Yes. We are going to help to make sure that project comes through with the passionate and dedicated leadership of Bishop Craig Coates. You see some more improvements to the Bates track that you have there where everybody goes to the Friends and Family Festival and other events at Weems Wayland. We have some money for Monarch Academy. We have Karen Timer Brown here from Historic Annapolis. We have some money for the Bryce House and then some money for the William Packer House as well. We have money for Peerless Wrens. We've put money into Peerless Wrens. I think this will be the third time. Yes. So we have more for them. We have money going to the Choice Neighborhood Initiative, the redevelopment of Eastport Terrace and Harbor House. We have money going there. We have money going to the South County part of my district, the giant that is on Solomon's Island Road that's going to be turned into a county rec center. We have money going there for that project, $2.2 million, thanks to Stewart's leadership and the folks in South County. So, like I said, this was a session where the budget predominated all of our discussions. So if there were bills you were tracking that you wished had passed that didn't pass, blame the budget, because we really had to focus there and make sure that whatever we did this year, we could honor those commitments and we could be faithful to the people in our state who trust us with their tax dollars. So thank you.